The Honourable Maggie Barry.
Mr Speaker, thank you. I rise with great pleasure to talk about Bill English's 8th budget. It is an excellent example of its kind. It gives us choices that we have not been able to make in other years, and we have listened to the arts sector, we have listened to conservation, and those are the two areas of my ministerial responsibilities. And I would have to say that that member who has just resumed her seat is a tragic example of her kind. She has achieved nothing. She does nothing. When people compare that member with the actual Member of Parliament for Auckland Central and all that the Honourable Nikki Kay has achieved, as opposed to doing what? Turning up at the odd disc jockeying, turning up to the odd event, actually doing very, very little. In fact, I can't think of a single contribution that member has made a difference to anybody. A tragic and pathetic example of her kind. But I'm not actually going to spend any more time on the foolishness and the delusional nonsense that is being peddled by the opposition. Instead, Mr Speaker, I will concentrate on what we have achieved. And this budget has achieved much. The economy is set to grow by 2.8% in the next 5 years. So when we look at what we have achieved around job growth, we've been able to spend more on health, more on education. Ultimately, it's much better results for New Zealand families and vulnerable children. And those are the kinds of things that count, rather than carping from the edges of the universe, as the Honourable Annette King does. Again, an ineffectual individual who achieved very, very little. In fact, put her portfolio backwards in the period of time that that member had it. So we look at Tony Ryle, we look at Jonathan Coleman, and we see people who have actually achieved. Let me look at my own portfolio responsibilities, because when you look at the arts sector in New Zealand, it is very easy to see that there has been a vibrancy, cultural dimensions that have been added to enrich us as a society. I am very grateful indeed that we have such resilient arts organisations. I am very glad indeed that they put together good, strong business cases, and I was able to support them. I put a very strong case to the Minister of Finance, who listened very carefully and who acted in a way that I think was responsible. For the NZSO, for example, their funding has increased by more than 10%, so they've gone up $1.2 million. That's from about $13.446 million to $14.646 million. This is an increase that will enable the Symphony Orchestra to travel more around the regions, to take its extraordinary world-class orchestral members and talent to parts of New Zealand that are clamouring to have that kind of cultural engagement. The Symphony Orchestra has responsibility for the youth orchestra as well. So it is nurturing the young orchestral people of the future. And I think that's a very important part of the arts. The NZSO were given the great accolade of being finalists in the Grammy Awards, up there with world-class orchestras, really up there punching above their weight in those international stakes. And they're doing that because they are supported in their own country. The Symphony Orchestra, I think, is a major asset for us. I think something like 60% of their orchestral members are now able to be used in a way that they were not able to be before. In other words, with the additional funding that they will have now, they will be able to travel around New Zealand, go to the regions and make sure that the very talented lineup of people that they have, whom I saw performing on the Italian National Day, 20 of them went to the celebration and were extraordinary and incredibly impressive to the ambassadors that were there and to all of us. Royal New Zealand Ballet, another example of a Crown entity that does an extraordinary amount. They have, out of their own endeavours for box office, for business and for partnerships and philanthropy, managed to achieve more than 60% of the funding that they require to run themselves. That's commendable. That's the sort of thing that Crown funding can do to assist and back up their endeavours, which are already very good indeed. Tutus on Tour, the ballet will be able to send more ballerinas around New Zealand, perhaps some more international tours as well. But along with Te Matatini, which has had a 56% increase, they will be able to take our national kapahaka, which is extraordinary and unique and very much part of who we are as New Zealanders and our identity to the world. For those who were privileged to see the Edinburgh tattoo, our Matatini Kapahaka groups that performed before them as the curtain raiser, if you like, to the tattoo, were extraordinary, and people love them, and they've been invited internationally around the world. The money, the $1.94 million, which we've been able to allocate up from $1.24 million, and this is in fact permanent baseline funding, will enable them to develop kapahaka around New Zealand. The regional organisation of Te Matatini will be able to set up 50 more groups a year in schools. They will be able to encourage kapahaka not only as a vibrant cultural expression, but also something that is good for your health, your cultural health and your physical health as well. So when I look at the entities that are under my immediate responsibilities as the Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, I'm very proud of what they have achieved. I'm very proud of the ability that they have, not only to reach the people of New Zealand and to resonate with them, but also to ensure that partners, philanthropists and others really appreciate and value them, which means, of course, that the taxpayer's dollar can go a great deal further than if we just paid one entity the lump sum of money and then did not rely or look at even, indeed, developing other business partnerships. My task is partly to make the taxpayers' money go that much further. I'm concentrating on doing that as well in my Department of Conservation, and despite some of the nonsense that's been peddled, particularly by the Greens and backed up by the other opposition people, DOC's operational spending has increased. It is difficult to understand why the Greens are having so much trouble with the mathematics. In 2008, the operational funding for DOC was $316 million a year. This year, $391 million, a rise by everybody's standards and everybody's mathematics except the Greens, who deliberately peddle misinformation and nonsense constantly about DOC, and also attack it. Attack it for what it does. Attack it for the fact that you have extraordinarily good, well-hearted people, good-hearted people who work for DOC and try their absolute best, and they succeed. I'm very proud of them. I'm very proud of what they do, and there's plenty of good news for conservation in this year's budget. Let's look at one aspect of it. The War on Weeds, which we launched last year, where I have the Dirty Dozen annual array of weeds that need to be kept under control. We have as our #1 weed, and I fear it will be so for many years to come, wildings. We call them wildings because they escape from where they ought to be and they get away on us in our New Zealand landscape. Generally they are conifers, but there are also sycamores and other specimens that have done this. So on budget day, Nathan, Guy and I announced a $16 million package, and that's going to increase our work to be able to control wildings. They occupy at the moment something like 6% of the country's total land area. That's about 1.8 million hectares, which is high value conservation and very productive land. They also smother our native species and ruin the biodiversity of New Zealand. So when we look at the money that we spend on wilding control, it's up around $11 million a year actually, and we are going to be targeting to control some priority areas, including the Molesworth Station, the headwaters of the Southern Alps, lakes and rivers, and the Central North Island. Battle for our birds is another reality this year because of the beech mast seeding, so $20.7 million has gone into landscape predator control, which involves the use of aerial 1080. But with that money, I have allocated a reasonable sum to do 2 pilot schemes on self-resetting traps. It is a very reasonable sum, actually. It's many millions of dollars, and it will be to test and to pilot these self-resetting traps, which once you have dealt with the rodent population, knock them back to negligible numbers. You then put the self-resetting traps in, and they're able to protect our endangered and threatened species. So this will be the biggest ever predator pest control operation in New Zealand's history. So it'll be more than 800,000 hectares, and that will prevent the plague proportion, biblical plague proportion actually, of rats, stoats and possums. So the results of 1080 have tremendously improved our ability as a nation to be able to control these predator numbers, these introduced eco-invaders. When I look look at superannuation as well. When we cast back over the 8 years that National has been in government, superannuation entitlement has gone up 34%. This is a government that cares about seniors, that is concerned about the way that social isolation and elder abuse, the growing rates of dementia numbers and so forth are needing to be planned for. Not feared, not worried about unduly, but to understand where we are heading with dementia rates with an ageing population. At the moment, it involves about 50,000 New Zealanders. That will treble, and we need to plan ahead for that. This was a great budget, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud to be part of a government that delivered it.
Mr. Speaker.
I